Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm always so happy to be here. Here, there. Very grateful to be here, part of this community, part of this family. So I'm glad you brought up All Souls Day because it wasn't until 20 minutes ago that I realized I wasn't raised Catholic. So All Souls Day is a Catholic holiday. And so when I was doing a little reading, it said, it's about the souls in purgatory who might be there because of these lesser sins they committed. Is that correct? That was not my understanding. So where I was coming from was what I learned or heard a few years ago was that oftentimes when people are killed suddenly or violently, their souls, their spirits get stuck on the lower earth planes. They're not, I'm glad to see some nodding because I just, that they get stuck. They can't fully ascend to the place of healing and light because of this trauma that happened. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because they weren't prepared. It happened so suddenly. But when I heard that, I was like, I have to start doing something about this. And I further heard, and I hope this isn't true, but sometimes they might even relive the trauma. And then I was like, that's heartbreaking. I hope that's not true. But anyway, for many years, I felt this strong soul connection with Native Americans and First People and Indigenous consciousness. And the last 5 to 7 years, I became aware that, all over this continent, there's places where they were killed in really brutal ways. And so I really started making it part of my purpose to go to these places to offer prayers for the spirits. But not just that, to help them move on. So, and I want to acknowledge right now that we are on the land that was lived on for a long time by the Lenape people, and it was stewarded by the Lenape people. So I want to honor them right now and thank them for, their lives on this beautiful land that we've kind of taken over, not always in a good way. So in my ministry school, one weekend we had a retreat with a Cherokee elder, this beautiful woman named Shirley. And she taught us about psychopomp work. And most people, I don't think, are familiar with that term. Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Some shamanic people have heard of it. But basically, my understanding is that you go into the world of spirit, you find these lost spirits, and you help usher them onto the light. So she demonstrated that for us because it was shortly after 9/11. So again, sudden traumatic death, there were a lot of souls that needed help, and she did that. Because I am not clairvoyant and my clairaudience skills are a little bit iffy, I couldn't really perceive what was happening, but I got the sense of it. And so I just went with all my innocence to just do the best I could. And I want to share 3 specific stories that were particularly instructive or inspiring, because I'm hoping that you might help pick up the torch. Because I know many of you have these gifts. I know you have the good hearts, and I know you have the gifts, many of you. So the first story happened in 2019 in Pennsylvania. I was back home from Santa Fe for a period of time, and I felt this draw to go to Carlisle. So Carlisle is the place where the biggest Native American boarding school was. So are you guys familiar with that travesty? No. Okay, so for a long period of time, our government had this policy of taking Native children away from their homes, their families, their tribes, and forcing them to attend these schools that would civilize them and assimilate them. Because there was so much fear of Native Americans, and they just wanted to take away all traces of their indigenousness. So when these poor children and teenagers arrived from sometimes thousands of miles away, they cut their hair, they made them take off their clothes and put on Western clothes. They weren't allowed to use their language or their names or anything that was part of their tradition. It was just absolutely forbidden. And there was a lot of abuse. So I'm telling you some hard stuff. There will be some uplifting stuff, so bear with me. But it was very, very hard, not only for the individuals, but for Native Americans as a whole, because it wiped out so much of their language and so much of their tradition, because they were literally forbidden under threat of, who knows what. So a lot of children ended up dying, not necessarily because they were killed, but because all this disease ran rampant through these schools. If you look up Carlisle boarding school, you'll see a picture with thousands of kids. It's all dressed in Western clothes, and it's really heartbreaking to see. So obviously they had the trauma of being removed from their people. They were being fed really horrible food. They were being forced to work. So of course their immune systems were going to be really depleted. And they were all in these, tight quarters. And so all these white diseases just, wiped out many of the children. And so I wanted to go to the cemetery to offer prayers. Okay. So I found a couple girlfriends who wanted to go with me. And we were following the GPS. And I had done a little bit of research, but not a lot. So I was unprepared for what happened next. It took us into Carlisle, and we had one more turn to get to the place. We turned, and there was a barricade and a police car. And a policeman comes to the window and says, what are you doing here? And we said, we're here to offer prayers at the cemetery. And what I didn't know was this school is on the land of the U.S. Army. And not just the Army, but the U.S. Army College of War. So to even set foot, we had to go get vetted. And fortunately, it wasn't that complicated. There was like a booth that looked almost like a toll booth on the other side of the road. And we went and gave our ID and stuff like that, and we're permitted to go on. But one of my girlfriends didn't want to do that. She felt uncomfortable for whatever reason. So my friend Ann and I were taken there. He unlocked the gate. We went in. Ann and I both had different visions of what we wanted to do. So we kind of went our separate ways, and we were going to meet again at the end. I brought tobacco and cornmeal to place at each of the graves. And there were so many graves, I ran out of offerings. So, and it's just a little pinch here, a little pinch there. I wasn't prepared. So I went in my purse and I was looking for coins and anything that I could put there. So the one thing I want to tell you is that some of them, there was no information or very little information, but some had the name of the tribe and where they were from. There were kids from as far away as Montana and Arizona and California and even Alaska. Yeah. Can you imagine? I can't imagine how traumatic for the kids and the families to be so far away. Probably had no idea where they were or how to get there. All right, so it starts to get interesting now. So after Ann and I were done, we met together, sat at the edge, and we offered prayers. And I told her what I had learned. And so we did our best to offer prayers to help guide them on. But again, without those clairaudient gifts, I couldn't tell if we were succeeding. We did the best we could. And then we went to meet up with Betsy, and we went out to eat and get grounded and, share stories and everything. And then we were heading home. So it's on the turnpike. And about 20 minutes into the drive, Betsy says, I think there are children here with us. She said, they are. There's children here with us. And she said, they feel happy and they feel safe here, which made me feel so good that they finally had a glimmer of happiness. And that's when I said to Betsy, who hadn't been there, we tried to offer the prayers, and I was thinking out loud, and I said, maybe because they were so young, they didn't know what to do. Maybe they needed help. Maybe they need someone to help guide them. And so we began talking about who can we invite in to help guide them on. We were tossing out some names, and Betsy said, they're already here. Like that quick, the helpers arrived. They were ready and so willing to help the children. All we need to do was call them. So, but here we were driving 65 miles an hour down the turnpike. So it didn't feel like the right time to kind of close the circle and the ceremony, you know, while we're driving. That didn't feel very respectful, or certainly to the driver. So we're looking and looking for a place to pull over. But those of you from nearby know that there's a huge section where there's no rest stops. And, you know, the exits, there's some exits that are really far apart. And that's where we were. And it was getting dark. It must have been the fall because it was already getting really dark. And we could find nowhere to pull over. So we're just driving along. The children are with us. The helpers are with us. We couldn't really do anything. So finally, we had to pull off at our exit. And, you know, we're at 309. So for any of you who aren't from around here, 309 is so commercial, stores, lights, restaurants, banks, blah, 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 blah. And we kept on looking, and, you know, there was guardrails and there was nowhere to pull over. So finally, we're driving along and I say, trees. And so Betsy turns off, and believe it or not, we culminated this ceremony in a Trader Joe parking lot. There were several trees at the edge of the parking lot, and because it was late, there weren't many people around, and there was this embankment separating us from 309 and all the traffic. So we just piled out and we circled up on the patch of grass that was around the tree, and we held hands. And I asked Betsy, are the children with us? And she said yes. I said, are the helpers with us? And she said yes. And we each just offered a 1 or 2 sentence prayer. And Betsy said, they're gone. And every time I tell this story, it's like I can't help but smile because it wasn't complicated. Like in my mind's eye, sometimes you need to do these great ceremonies, but no, it wasn't necessary. So what I discovered, what I believe, there are only 3 things that were really necessary. A clear intention, help those spirits, good hearts, and helpers from the other side. And, you know, normally I remember that, but for some reason I forgot to do it, you know, when I was in Carlisle. So it was so important for me to learn this. And I took it with me on my journey last year when I went to various spots. I went to about 10 different spots to offer these kinds of prayers. And one of them was Wounded Knee, which of course is one of the only massacres that white Americans tend to know about. There's so many, you guys. If you just Google massacres of Native Americans, there's like hundreds. And some of them, you know, there might be 20 people, but some, there's 200, 400, 700 at a time. So, Wounded Knee, a friend of mine wanted to go to Pine Ridge Reservation, and Wounded Knee is a little town on Pine Ridge. And so I picked her up in Omaha. We went there together, and some Native American men guided us up the hill to where the cemetery was. So we went there and I gave her tobacco and we did our prayers and we came together. By the time we came together, other people were arriving to pay respects because, of course, this is a place that is widely known. And there happened to be a powwow on the reservation that weekend. So there were a lot of people coming to pay respects. And there was nowhere private for us to offer our prayers. There were no buildings, there were no big trees. And so we ended up sitting on like this concrete foundation for the big arch that went into the cemetery. So like everybody saw us, but you know, that's where we were. And we just sat knee to knee and I just said prayers very quietly. And then remembering Carlisle, I said something to the effect of, you know, we call in the holy ones, we call in the medicine people and the ancestors and the grandmothers of these people. And I felt inspired to say, if you feel like it, you know, maybe make a circle around this area because we're up on the top of a hill. Just make a circle around all these beings. And shortly after that, after the prayers we said, I felt this great whoosh of ascending energy. And I was so grateful to feel that because I couldn't see or hear what was going on, but that felt like affirmation. But it was also sad to think that they'd been there for 100 years waiting for this. I hope that's not true, but I guess time's different on the other side. Yeah. So anyway, I have one more story, but I really want to share this with you guys specifically, because if this calls to your heart at all, there's so many opportunities. It's not just Native Americans. I mean, you could go to schools where children were killed. You could go to places where Black Americans were murdered or lynched. You could go to slaughterhouses. There's so many of them. And it doesn't even have to be places where people died. Like I went to a Japanese internment camp. I felt this wave of sadness there. You could go to prisons, be outside the prison gates. There's so many places to offer prayers, and places where spirits may be kind of stuck and maybe just waiting for our love and our prayers and our helpers to help guide them. So if anybody feels inclined, like one local place relatively is Gettysburg. I hear there are so many lost souls there. And if anybody wants to go back to Carlisle, I would welcome that. So one more story, if you don't mind. Very important for me. So on the way home, I went through North Carolina and did some research. I tended not to do the research ahead of time. I would wait till I got somewhere, and then I would see if there was anything I needed to do while I was there. So I did offer prayers for the Tuscarora people, and I found out about the Occaneechi people. I was visiting a girlfriend who I knew from grad school, and we had both been through a program called Indigenous Mind. So I thought that she might be up for doing this work with me. And when I asked her, she immediately said yes. Interestingly, she had met some Occaneechi people doing ceremony not that long before. So she was especially feeling a connection with them. Some of these places you can find easily because there's historic markers or because they're national monuments, like Sand Creek in Colorado and Wounded Knee and a couple other places. But sometimes you just have to use your intuition to figure out where to go. This particular time, the massacre had happened on Occaneechi Island, which was no longer in existence because it had gotten flooded. And so we did as much research as we could, but there wasn't a lot available. So we just had to get to the river, the Roanoke River near Clarksville, Virginia. So that's what we did. We finally found a place by the river, and we worked together well. We would kind of alternate between invoking the spirits and making offerings and offering prayers and songs. When it felt complete, after we helped to usher them on and we thanked everybody, I turned to Erin and I said, I hope I didn't end it too quickly. I felt complete. And she said, I did too. And then she shared something that blew my mind. So having this affinity for Native Americans and always rooting for the underdog anyway, my prayers were all focused on the Native Americans who were so unjustly treated. But what she said is, after we did that, some of the white militiamen came to her and said, can we go too? And she said, sure. And I said, thank you for that. And what I realized, to my embarrassment, is that we all need prayers. We all need this kind of help. And, if any one of us has an opportunity to go to a place of healing and soul evolution, it helps the whole collective, right? So any prayers for any people, whether it's the victims or the perpetrators, whether it's the good guys or the bad guys, these are obviously labels that we don't need to use, but everybody needs assistance, right? Everybody, and we can help them all. And so, when these guys wanted to go, that's a good thing, so as they learn their lessons, they can live better lives the next time around. It helps us all. It helps the whole planet ascend. So those are my stories, and I thank you for listening so kindly. And thank you.
Yeah.